we are able to go forward, and we'll share some of this information. We'll bring, yeah, I think we have as many as I think we're likely to have. Okay, Mr. Sheldon.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that you do have some grace time, up to 15 minutes, that if you would like to wait for the other two board members that are going to attend, it's up to council. It's a joint meeting with the board.
Okay. My concern is I think we've got a hard line exit with one of our councillors as well. Let's split the difference. Okay. All right. Well, then I'll call this workshop to order. Please note that in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have an informal discussion regarding various matters. Having seen the agenda, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest?
I think I might have an outstanding fine.
Okay. Okay. So what I'll do then is I'll turn this over to Mr. Shelton to put some context and background into tonight's discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could just start out, I'm going to do the first two slides, Todd. I think you were going to do them, and then I'll turn it over to Todd. But just before I do that, there are slides that are coming for the public part of the presentation. And the slides, I think you've handed them out. The ones that have been handed out to council members have both the public and the closed session in them. So the front does not say confidential, but they're stapled together with the confidential portion. So this is a council workshop, a joint workshop with the library board members. And it flows from a workshop that was held dealing with the framework for future facilities and land use, and that was February 22nd of this year. That focus was primarily on the recreation playbook, but it also touched on operational issues with public works and also the library facility needs. So at that session, or maybe subsequent to that, there was a recommendation that was adopted, a motion that council and the library board come together for a facilitated joint planning workshop in Q3 2016 to explore future library considerations. We've accelerated that somewhat just to be sure that it fits into the context of other decisions that are before council and other matters that we're dealing with. So today what we're going to do then is start out with the CEO of the library making a presentation, and then we'll go into a closed portion that deals with property considerations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd.
Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the library board. Just moving along in the presentation here. So again, one of the reasons why we're doing this is to help explore library facility needs, options, and to think about a shared vision, to arrive at a shared understanding on a potential roadmap going forward for decision making, and to form the basis for a closer study of library future facility options. Some of the key considerations today, as with a lot of these kinds of discussions, are the council's philosophy on what the service levels to the community should be, what the funding and financing options might be, and there are obviously some land considerations and timing. From the point of view of funding, library facilities funding could include one or more of the following. One of the obvious ones is development charges. Some scenarios might envision a potential sale of land, the asset replacement fund, as it relates at least to the current library building, tax-supported capital, donations, sponsorship, and partnerships, and as well grants. And again, one of the rationales for today's date and the meeting is that in order to be eligible for grants, some advanced planning is necessary, and we're obviously not quite there yet. Just a note on development charges. As is with typical projects of this nature, up to 90% of projects involving library facilities can be funded through DCs. One of the issues that we have is that the amount being collected for the library is quite limited because the definition of service levels under the DC Act means that effectively with a growing population, the service level provided of library services is declining because the same amount of square feet and other resources per capita. DCs cannot be used to replace an existing asset, of course. The current funding envelope for the library is $2.4 million, with $1.88 million already in reserves, and that is growing slowly. In terms of land, the review that we've done has taken into account current land utilizations of town-owned land, any potential need to acquire additional land, dispositions of current town land, and possible repurposing of current town-owned land. Just again, to set some context, of course, there is a relation here to Council's strategic priorities. It may touch on a number of them, but most importantly, number 6, enhancing recreational and community facilities. There's the rest of them. Other informing documents that we have in terms of strategic documents and ongoing processes, there is the secondary plan for the growth corridors, the Community Centre Lands Task Force, all the development charges, studies and reports that have been done, and the library's own strategic plan from an operational point of view. Just a little bit of background on the library. You've probably heard this many times before, a bit of a snapshot of the levels of usage within the community. And I won't go through each one of these. You have this for reference. A bit about the role of public libraries in this current era. Some of the roles that public libraries play are related to equity, and that is often related to the access to the internet, to digital literacy and other tools for participating in a digital economy, the access to e-government and other services, and really sharing the cost of media. And I'm using the word media rather than books, because quite often it's sharing the cost of subscriptions to electronic media. Another role is that of the impact in the community, and the impact of the community being lifelong learning, technology discovery, literacy, and economic development. And just in terms of the presence of a public library, some of which is of course online, and some of which is a physical space, and the physical space's impact is often related to its ability to be a community hub, collaboration, study, innovation, incubation space, that sort of thing. So we do have a quick video here, which was produced by the N6 Libraries. Well, it's 2.5 minutes. I hope that's quick enough. We'll see if this is... me just close this here. Just very, very briefly, some of the things that are happening, again, to set the context at Newmarket Public Library, our role of igniting community dialogue, discovery, and debate, which has led us to our terrific Idea Market series of community discussions, York Info, the community information volunteer database that we run, our sort of pop-up library presence at a lot of community events. Some of the technology learning projects that we've done, so our Maker Hub, which is just in the process of opening, 3D printer, vinyl cutter, and digital media station. And some of the sort of physical presence and efficiency projects that we've done, so the automated materials check-ins project, the Story Pod at Riverwalk Commons, and some of the digital media stuff we provide, like music downloads. Again, setting the context in terms of the limitations of the current facility, the space that we have currently is one of the lowest per capita library space in Ontario municipalities. So the standard typically is given as a minimum of 0.6 square feet up to 1 square foot when you include the administrative or technical or business function space per capita. So right now we would be at about 0.38 square feet per capita in a community that's still growing, so we're quite off that mark. From an accessibility point of view, the current facility is cramped for space, barely meeting a minimum space to allow a motorized scooter in all areas. The accessibility ramp at the front of the building is not to current standards, although fortunately grandfathered under the AODA. From a logistics point of view, we don't have a loading dock, a separate staff entrance. Our storage is extremely limited. Parking, as we all know, is quite limited with only 22 dedicated spaces. From a point of view of community reach, the question becomes, is one location sufficient or not? And certainly overall would say that the space for learning, collaboration, and exploration is insufficient. And I always give as an example that our Maker Hub that we're currently open is actually in what used to be a closet. So we sometimes call it the Maker Closet because that was the only space that we had. In terms of options that we might consider, would suggest that there are really two basic options moving forward, and one is a single central library location, which would be obviously larger than the current one. Again, to meet that per capita standard, it would be ideally 60 to 70 square feet, 1,000 square feet that is. Some of the advantages that it would give us is it would be a way to contain operational costs with a single location and economies of scale. Community reach would be still a question to ask ourselves, and obviously construction costs or renovation costs is a question. The other option is maintaining the current location and adding one or more branch locations. From a square foot point of view, the ideal amount of space to add to the current is 20 to 30,000 square feet. Obviously, an actual individual location can be meaningful at a much smaller level than that. Certainly an advantage of maintaining the current location is maintaining the synergy with Main Street, Riverwalk Commons, and the Old Town Hall, what we like to call the cultural campus of downtown Newmarket. Having more than one location can mean that operational costs are higher. It can certainly mean that community reach is better. And the question always remains about the construction costs, and we can't really answer those now. And just in terms of the kind of vision that we would have for a new or an expanded library facility, certainly would involve space that is less dominated by tall book stacks and less of a warehouse and more of a space that would allow for technology, learning, incubation, collaboration, study, community access, meeting space, potential synergies with other community services in a hub model. Technology infrastructure and connectivity would be key. Self-service and efficiency, which of course we're currently moving towards. A lot of people would say to us that a more open concept design with a lot of natural light would be appropriate, and really space that is flexible and accessible. And now we're getting to the rationale for the closed session portion. Mr. Shelton, did you?
Thank you. Yeah, That's a rationale for going into the closed session, and I think before we do that, if there are any questions on this part of the presentation, in the closed session, it will set out some options for discussion with council members.
Councillor Twinney, and then Regional Councillor.
Just a quick question. I know in the past we've talked a little bit about having like a satellite location or another branch. Would that though, I guess, I mean, what my thought is right away is, would there have to be a lot of duplication? So, I mean, of basically the same thing. So we wouldn't be really broadening perhaps the content within the library, just sort of duplicating it, because we'd have to have the same, obviously same books, same interests, same the computers, all those kind of things. So just what your thoughts are on that, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. That's a great question. And the answer, I mean, is really yes and no. I mean, you can, there is some duplication, and that's why we refer to the operational cost questions. Certainly, direct customer service and staff assistance would be there in all cases. You wouldn't be duplicating administrative functions or IT. They can be located in one place. And there is an opportunity as well when you look at two locations, especially Newmarket is still relatively dense and small. There is an opportunity, and this quite often happens, to really differentiate the sorts of things you put in different locations. So whereas one might be more emphasizing more the sort of the physical media, the book warehouse kind of thing, and reference or research functions, the other might be a bit more about collaboration space, technology,
Okay.
even from the point of view of resources that you offer. Some things are online, so the duplication isn't a question. And for the physical sort of media, I mean, there are many communities where they have a very small collection of just sort of popular bestsellers in one particular location, because people would always have access to greater collections. So it can be managed both ways.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Regional Councillor.
Thanks. Thanks. Presentation, and I think also congratulations to the Library Board on some of the great initiatives in the last while with the new strategic plan, but the Idea Market and the Story Pod and other things that have been going on. I think it's a bit like Jane's. I guess I think it's a good starting point to sort of list the areas of pros and cons. But I'm wondering, is there, like when other jurisdictions have gone through this, is there a more formalized, and I got to believe there's some sort of literature out there that talks about the benefits of multiple locations versus one location. A lot of those then have to sort of be contextualized. I mean, the size of the jurisdiction matters, various things. I mean, obviously in East Gwillimbury, when you're looking at Mount Albert versus Hull Landing compared to Newmarket, that would mean different things. But would there be other things we could look to, or a bit more of an analysis? Because it's a big question. I mean, all this is assuming there is a change, first of all. But if we do pursue a change, I guess I'm struggling with that. And does it depend partially, I guess, upon, do you almost have to do a bit of a visioning exercise for what you think you want to achieve in the end? Because the opportunity to make a sort of a more engaged community hub might have advantages with the one larger space that could become more, but obviously the advantage of being able to stay in the downtown with, as you said, that area that's got some synergies, Riverwalk, the Old Town Hall, being able to hold related events there. So how do you drill further into that and start to really make sense of, am I right, first of all, by saying that you almost have to go through a bit of a visioning exercise, and what do people want this to be?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it really would depend on the community's priorities and our particular situation and physicality of it and so on and so forth. Unlike the standard, for example, of square feet per capita or number, there are statistics but not standards. So there is a statistic within Ontario, number of service points per 10,000 people, for example. But I think that does depend on the community, and there's a lot of historical reasons and geographical reasons that other communities have. Guelph has, I think, 8 branches for a population not much larger than ours, but there's reasons there. But I do agree, it is a lot of it is about the boils down to the vision, the opportunities, the community needs, and so on and so forth. And it is possibly something that's worthwhile of further study. There is some literature on, as I alluded to earlier, there is some literature on defining various levels of roles of different library services within a community, you know, a central library versus a sort of a small little storefront community location. But that's a decision that I would say is fairly unique to each community in terms of figuring out the number of locations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Maybe after we get through the closed session portion, there may be other items that we might come back to when we come back into the public session. So could I have a motion then, given that we're going into property matters, that we go into a closed session in order to deal with proposed acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality? So, Councillor Hempton, Councillor Bazan, second. All those in favor? That is carried. Close the doors.